They had nowhere left to go until they found a hidden cabin sealed inside the mountain. If you've ever felt like you were on your own, like the world had already decided who you were going to be, stick with me. This story is for you. And if you feel a connection to what I'm about to share, maybe think about subscribing. We're building something real here, a place for stories that matter. My 18th birthday started with the sound of a zipper, a harsh, metallic scrape in the pre-dawn quiet of the Northgate Youth Services dormitory. It was the sound of finality. I was zipping up the only thing I owned that couldn't be folded and tucked into a pocket, a black duffel bag worn gray at the seams, containing 2 changes of clothes, a paperback with a cracked spine, and a toothbrush. 18 years of life, packed into a bag you could carry with one hand. The state of California was officially done with me. They'd given me a cake the night before, a sheet cake from a supermarket with blue frosting that stained your teeth. The other kids, some I'd known for years, others who were just passing through the system's revolving door, sang a tired version of Happy Birthday. It wasn't a celebration. It was a farewell ceremony. It meant, good luck out there. Don't come back. Mr. Henderson, the night supervisor, stood by the door. He was a decent man, as decent as you could be in a job that was 90% paperwork and 10% telling kids their life wasn't over just because it felt like it was. He had that perpetually tired look, the kind you get when you've seen too many stories in the same way. He held a large manila envelope. "Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is it." I nodded, slinging the bag over my shoulder. The weight of it was nothing, but it felt like an anchor. "There's the final paperwork," he continued, tapping the envelope. "Your birth certificate, social security card, the check for the $200 from the Emancipation Fund. And this," he pulled out a smaller, crisper envelope. It was cream-colored, made of thick, expensive-feeling paper that looked wildly out of place in the cinderblock hallway. My name, Leonardo Vance, was typed on the front, followed by an address for a law firm downtown. "This came for you a week ago, from a lawyer. They were very specific that you were to receive it on your 18th birthday, not a day before." A lawyer? My mind raced. Lawyers meant trouble. In my world, you only saw a lawyer if you were being charged with something or sued for something. I hadn't done anything. Not recently, anyway. I took the envelope. The paper was cool and stiff against my fingers. "Do you know what it's about?" I asked. Henderson shook his head. "No idea, Keith. Just that they've been trying to locate you for a while. The firm represents the estate of Arthur Vance." My breath caught in my throat. Arthur Vance. My grandfather. A name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in a decade. A name that tasted like rust and ash in my memory. The name of the man who had put me into this system in the first place. The man who had promised to come back and never did. A cold knot formed in my stomach. A familiar mix of anger and a deeper, more wounded feeling I refused to name. "Right," I said, my voice flat. I shoved the fancy envelope into my bag with the rest of my life. I didn't want to look at it. I just wanted to get out. Henderson walked me to the front door. The sun was just starting to tint the gray sky pink over the strip malls and power lines. He put a hand on my shoulder. "You're a good kid, Leo. You're smarter than you let on. Don't let this world chew you up." I gave him a small, tight smile. It was the best I could do. Then I pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped out into the world that was waiting to do just that. The door clicked shut behind me, another final sound in a morning full of them. I was free, and I had never felt more alone. The law office of Alvarez and Finch was on the 32nd floor of a glass and steel tower that scraped the sky. The lobby was all marble and hushed whispers, a world away from the cracked linoleum and disinfectant smell of Northgate. I felt like a ghost, a smudge on their polished reality. I'd spent $50 of my $200 on a new pair of jeans and a plain gray shirt, hoping to look less like a charity case. I wasn't sure it had worked. The receptionist eyed my duffel bag with a polite, practiced suspicion before buzzing me in. Ms. Alvarez was waiting for me in a corner office with a view that stretched all the way to the ocean. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She didn't smile, but her handshake was firm. "Mr. Vance, thank you for coming. Please sit." The chair was leather, and it sighed as I sat down. The desk between us was a vast expanse of polished mahogany, empty except for a single, thick file. My name was on the tab. My life, apparently, was in that file. "I'll get straight to the point," she began, opening it. "I am the executor of your grandfather's estate. Arthur Vance passed away 3 months ago." I just stared at her. Passed away. The words didn't seem to connect to anything. The man in my memory was a giant, with hands like gnarled oak and a laugh that could shake a room. He was a force of nature, not someone who could just stop. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest, a phantom limb aching for a connection that had been severed years ago. I thought I'd be angry, or maybe even relieved. Instead, I just felt empty. "He's dead." I repeated, the words clumsy in my mouth. "Yes," she said, her tone clinical but not unkind. "He had a heart condition for some years. It was peaceful. In his sleep," she paused, letting the information settle. "He left you everything, everything?" What was everything? The man who had dropped me off at a social services office with a small suitcase and a promise he never kept? The man who hadn't sent a single letter or made a single phone call in 10 years? What could he possibly have to leave? Ms. Alvarez slid a photograph across the desk. It was a picture of a small, rustic cabin, more of a shack really, perched on the edge of a thick forest. Behind it, a mountain rose up, its peak shrouded in mist. "He owned a piece of property," she explained. 40 acres in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The cabin is on that land. It's remote, off-grid. It was his home. I looked at the picture. It looked desolate, lonely, a place at the end of the world. "He left me a shack in the woods?" The bitterness in my voice surprised me. Ms. Alvarez's expression didn't change. She slid another document across the desk. It was a property tax delinquency notice. The amount owed was highlighted in yellow, $9,412. "He also left you his debts," she said. "The property taxes haven't been paid in 2 years. The county has placed a lien on the land." Furthermore, she slid another letter over, this one from a different law firm, its letterhead embossed and aggressive. "A development corporation, West Ridge Holdings, has been trying to acquire the land for some time. Your grandfather repeatedly refused their offers. Now that he has passed, they have made a final offer. They will pay off the back taxes and give you $10,000 for the deed. The offer expires in 30 days. If you don't accept and the taxes aren't paid, the county will seize the property and sell it at public auction. West Ridge Holdings will almost certainly be the buyer." My head was spinning. It was a cruel joke, a punchline to a decade of silence. My grandfather hadn't left me a home. He'd left me a notice of eviction. He'd left me a choice between nothing and slightly more than nothing. $10,000. To me, it was a fortune. It was a new start, a cheap apartment, a used car, a chance to be someone other than the kid who aged out of the system. It was a smart choice, the only choice. "So I sell it," I said, the words feeling like a betrayal I couldn't explain. "That's the sensible option," Ms. Alvarez agreed, her gaze steady. "It's not a fortune, but it's a start for a young man in your position. I have the paperwork right here. You sign, and the money will be in an account for you within a week." She was offering me an escape hatch, a clean break from a past that only ever brought me pain. I should have felt relieved. I should have snatched the pen from her hand. But I looked down at the picture of that lonely cabin again. There was something about it, something in the way it stood defiant against the vast, wild landscape. It looked like it was keeping a secret. "What if I don't want to sell?" I asked, the question surprising me as much as it seemed to surprise her. Ms. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "To keep the property, you would need to pay the back taxes in full within 28 days. Do you have $9,412, Mr. Vance?" I looked at the worn canvas of my duffel bag on the floor. I had $150 and a bus token. "No," I said quietly. "No, I don't." "Then you have your answer," she said, sliding a pen across the desk. It felt heavy in my hand. This was it, the final cut, the moment I sign away the last broken piece of my family. I could walk out of this office with a future, a small one, but one that was mine. All I had to do was erase him completely. But a memory flickered, unbidden. Me, maybe 7 years old, sitting on his lap on the porch of that same cabin. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. He was pointing up at the mountain. "That's not just a mountain, Leo," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "That's the old man. He guards this place. He keeps the secrets. As long as we respect him, he'll protect us." It was a silly, childish memory, but it was real. It was one of the few good things I had left. I put the pen down. "I want to see it," I said. Ms. Alvarez looked at me, a flicker of something, pity, respect, in her eyes. "See it? Mr. Vance, it's a 6-hour bus ride and then a 5-mile walk from the nearest town. There's no power, no running water. The place has been empty for months. I don't care," I said, and the words felt true. He left it to me. "I have to see it before I sign it away," she sighed, a long, slow exhalation. "The offer stands for 30 days. The bus to Pine Creek leaves from the downtown terminal at 7 a. Then it's your time and your money to waste." She gathered the papers back into the file. "There's one more thing." She reached into the file and pulled out a small, tarnished brass key tied to a leather thong. "He left this for you as well. He was very specific about it. It's the key to the cabin." She handed it to me. It was cold and heavy in my palm. A key to a place I couldn't keep from a man I no longer knew. It felt less like a gift and more like a burden. The bus ride was a slow transition from one world to another. The concrete and glass of the city bled into sprawling suburbs, then faded into dusty farmland, and finally gave way to the rolling foothills of the Sierra Nevada. With every mile, the air grew cleaner, the sky bigger. I watched the world change through the grimy window, the key a cold weight in my pocket. I was burning through my remaining money with a recklessness that scared me. The bus ticket alone was a third of what I had left. This trip was an act of foolish defiance, a pilgrimage to a place I was just going to lose anyway. But I couldn't shake the feeling that signing those papers in that sterile office would have been a kind of death. It would have been accepting the story that the world had written for me, that I was alone, that my past was a liability, and that my only option was to take the money and run. For 10 years, I had been a case file, a resident of a state-funded facility. I had been defined by my abandonment. Going to this cabin felt like the first choice I had ever made that was completely my own, even if it was a stupid one. The town of Pine Creek wasn't much of a town at all. It was a wide spot in the road with a gas station, a general store, and a diner with a flickering neon sign. The bus hissed to a stop, and I was the only one who got off. The air was thin and sharp, smelling of pine needles and cold stone. The mountain, the old man from my grandfather's story, loomed over the town, its granite face scarred with shadows. It looked bigger, more intimidating than it had in the photograph. The directions Ms. Alvarez had given me were simple. Follow the old logging road east out of town for 5 miles. I bought a bottle of water and a bag of jerky at the general store, the old man behind the counter giving me a long, curious look. He had a weathered face and hands stained with what looked like motor oil. "You're not from around here," he stated, not asked. "No, sir," I said. "Just passing through. Ain't much to pass through till out this way," he said, his eyes lingering on my duffel bag. "Unless you're headed up to the Vance place." I must have looked surprised because he chuckled. "Everyone knows everyone in a town this small. Knew your granddad. Arthur was a stubborn old goat. Kept to himself mostly. Sad to hear he passed. He pushed my change across the counter. You his boy. Grandson," I corrected. "Leo," he nodded slowly. "Well, Leo, good luck up there. That mountain's got a mind of its own." The walk was harder than I expected. The logging road was more of a suggestion than a road. A pair of dirt ruts overgrown with weeds, winding steadily uphill. My city-soft feet ached, and the duffel bag seemed to get heavier with every step. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the gravel and the whisper of the wind through the tall pines. It was a lonely sound. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A rusted mailbox, half hidden in a tangle of wild blackberry bushes. The name Vance barely visible beneath the rust. A narrow path led from the road into the trees. I followed it, my heart hammering in my chest. And then there it was, the cabin. It was smaller than I remembered and more dilapidated. The porch roof sagged in the middle, the windows were clouded with grime, and the wooden walls had been bleached to a silvery gray by years of sun and snow. It looked fragile, like the mountain was slowly reclaiming it. It looked abandoned. The feeling of disappointment was a physical blow. This was it. This was the legacy of the giant from my memories? A collapsing shack full of debt and bad memories? I stood there for a long time, the silence of the forest pressing in on me. The anger I'd been expecting, the rage I thought I'd feel was gone. In its place was just a profound, aching sadness. For him, for me, for the 10 years of silence that lay between us like a chasm. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the 3 creaking steps to the porch. The brass key felt slick in my sweaty palm. I slid it into the lock. It was stiff, protesting with a grating squeal, but with a final, forceful turn, the lock clicked open. The door swung inward on groaning hinges, releasing a wave of stale, cold air. The inside of the cabin was dark and smelled of dust and mice and old wood smoke. A single room, dominated by a massive stone fireplace on the far wall. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center. A narrow cot was pushed against one wall, a threadbare blanket folded neatly at its foot. To the side was a small kitchenette, a hand pump for water at the sink, a few dusty cans still on the shelf. It was Spartan, the home of a man who needed little. But it was clean, meticulously, obsessively clean. The floor was swept, the single plate and cup were washed and stacked by the sink. It didn't look like a place someone had simply left. It looked like a place someone had prepared. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and I saw something on the table. In the very center of the worn wood surface sat a small, metal box, like an old cash box, with a keyhole on the front. Next to it was a single, sealed envelope. My name, Leonardo, was written on it in a spidery, unfamiliar hand. His handwriting. My hands were shaking as I picked up the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. This was it. The explanation. The excuse. 10 years of silence, contained in a single piece of paper. I tore it open. The letter inside was written on the same heavy, cream-colored paper as the one from the lawyer. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. My dear Leo, if you're reading this, then it means I am gone. And it means you have come back. I am sorry, boy. I'm sorry for so many things. I know you must hate me. You have every right to. I know you believe I abandoned you. In a way, I did. But I need you to understand that it was the hardest thing I have ever done. It broke me in a way you will hopefully never understand. I sent you away not because I didn't want you, but because I had to protect you. This land, this mountain, it's not just dirt and trees, Leo. There's a history here, a dark one. Years ago, before you were born, I got tangled up with some very bad people. They were involved in a mining operation further up the mountain, an illegal one. They thought they'd found gold, but what they found was trouble. They were dangerous men, and I made the mistake of witnessing something I shouldn't have. I thought it was over, that they were long gone. But a few years after your parents died, and you came to live with me, one of them came back. He found me. He made it clear that as long as I was on this land, my life was forfeit. And as long as you were with me, so is yours. They didn't want witnesses. They didn't want loose ends. They wanted this land, and they wanted me gone. I couldn't go to the police. These men had connections. They would have painted me as a crazy old man, and you would have been taken from me anyway. So I made a choice. I took you to the city. I told the social workers a story about how I was too old and sick to care for you. I made myself the villain in your story, Leo, because it was the only way to keep you safe. I promised I would come back for you when it was safe, but it was never safe. He was always watching. He has people in town. The dead on this land? It wasn't an accident. They made sure I couldn't get work, that my credit was ruined. They were squeezing me, trying to force me out. The development company, West Ridge Holdings, it's them. It's the same people hiding behind a corporate name. I know this is a lot to take in. I know it doesn't erase the years of silence. But I hope you can find it in your heart to believe me. I never stopped loving you, boy. Not for a single day. Everything I did to keep you alive. Now, for the reason you are here. This shack is not your inheritance. This is just a shell, the part one let the world see. The real cabin, our home, is hidden. Protected, just like I try to protect you. The key to the metal box is taped to the underside of this table. Inside the box, you'll find a map. It won't make sense at first. It's a riddle. You're always good at riddles. The old man will show you the way. Don't trust anyone. Don't tell anyone you are here. Find a real cabin. Everything you need to know is there. Yours always, Grandpa Arthur. I read the letter 3 times, the thin paper trembling in my hands. The world had tilted on its axis. The story I had told myself for a decade, the story of the grandfather who threw me away, was a lie. It was a shield he had built around me, and he had let me hate him for it. The hollow space in my chest was suddenly filled with a storm of emotions. Grief, hot and sharp, for the man I had never really known. Rage at the faceless people who had stolen him from me. And a deep, gut-wrenching guilt for the years I'd spent cursing his name. I collapsed into one of the wooden chairs, the letter falling from my fingers onto the dusty floor. I cried. I cried for the 8-year-old boy left on the steps of a government building. I cried for the old man who had died alone on this mountain, protecting his secret. I cried because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt loved, and it was the most painful, beautiful feeling in the world. For a while, I just sat there, letting the silence and the truth wash over me. The afternoon sun slanted through the grimy window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The cabin felt different now. It wasn't just a shack, it was a decoy, a piece of a puzzle. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. Find a real cabin. I felt a surge of purpose, a feeling so foreign it was almost startling. This was no longer about a piece of land or $10,000. This was about my grandfather's last wish. It was about justice. It was about finishing the story he had started. I reached under the table. My fingers brushed against a piece of tape, and I peeled it off. A small, ornate iron key, much older than the one for the front door, was attached. It fit perfectly into the lock on the metal box. With a soft click, the lid sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed velvet, was a hand-drawn map on a piece of parchment and a simple, brass compass. The map wasn't a map in the traditional sense. There were no grid lines, no scale, no "you are here" marker. It was a drawing of the mountain, the old man, but stylized, almost like a fantasy map from a book. There were landmarks I recognized. The creek that ran west of the cabin, a distinctive granite outcropping that looked like a wolf's head, the old logging road. But there were other symbols, cryptic and strange. A drawing of a constellation, Orion, the hunter, a sketch of a lone hawk circling, and a series of phrases written in my grandfather's spidery script. Where the hunter's belt touches the stone spine, follow the hawk's gaze at midday, the door is not a door. It was a riddle, just as he'd said. I looked out the window at the massive granite face of the mountain, the stone spine. I could see the ridge he was talking about, a long, serrated line of rock that ran down from the summit. And I knew the constellation, Orion's belt, 3 bright stars in a row. I took the map and the compass and stepped outside. It was early afternoon. The sun was high in the sky. I looked up, searching for a hawk, a flicker of hope in my chest. What was I doing? I was a city kid. I knew about bus schedules and street corners, not constellations and hawks. This was crazy. I could still walk back to town, call Ms. Alvarez, and take the money. I could be on a bus back to civilization by morning. And I have to be honest with you, if you've made it this far into my story, you know this is the kind of moment that defines a life. You're standing at a crossroads. One path is easy, sensible, and leads back to everything you know. The other is terrifying, uncertain, and leads into the wilderness. Have you ever had a moment like that? Where your gut is telling you to do the crazy thing, the thing that makes no logical sense? If you have, I hope you'll leave a comment below and tell me about it. Because in that moment, standing in front of that shack, I realized that this community, the people who watch and share these stories, we're all connected by moments like that. We're connected by the choice to take the harder path. And I want you to know, I read every single comment. Your stories matter. They help me make sense of my own. Now, let's get back to the mountain. I made my choice. I wasn't going to run. Not this time. I looked at the map again. Follow the hawk's gaze at midday. I scanned the vast blue sky. Nothing. Just the endless pines and the silent, watching rock. Disappointment started to creep in. Maybe I was just a fool, chasing a ghost story. And then I saw it. Not a real hawk. Carved into the trunk of a massive ponderosa pine about 50 yards from the cabin was the unmistakable silhouette of a hawk in flight, its head pointing directly up the mountainside, away from the path. It was weathered and covered in moss, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. My grandfather's cleverness sent a shiver down my spine. I took out the compass. The hawk carving was pointing almost due north. I adjusted the duffel bag on my shoulder and started walking, pushing through the dense undergrowth, leaving the shack and the logging row behind. The forest floor was a thick carpet of pine needles, muffling my footsteps. The air grew cooler as I climbed, the trees thinning out to reveal massive granite boulders, some as big as cars. It was slow going. After an hour of climbing, I stopped to catch my breath, my legs burning. I checked the map again. Where the hunter's belt touches the stone spine, I looked up at the ridge, the stone spine, and I saw it. 3 enormous, ancient pine trees, standing in a perfectly straight line, growing right out of the rock face. They were taller and older than any of the surrounding trees. Orion's belt. I scrambled up the last section of the slope, my hands gripping roots and rocks to pull myself up. When I reached the base of the 3 giant trees, I was standing on a narrow ledge. To my left, the mountain continued its steep ascent. To my right, a sheer drop of several hundred feet. The view was breathtaking. I could see the whole valley laid out below me, a patchwork of green and brown. The shack was just a tiny gray square in the distance. I was standing directly on the stone spine of the mountain, but there was nothing here, just rock and the 3 ancient trees. No cabin, no door. I ran my hands over the rock face, searching for a seam, a hidden lever, anything. Nothing. I felt a surge of frustration. Had I come all this way for nothing? Was this some final, cruel joke? I sat down on the ledge, defeated, the map spread out on my lap. The door is not a door. What did that even mean? My eyes traced the drawing of the mountain, the lines and symbols my grandfather had so carefully inked. And then I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A tiny detail. Next to the drawing of the 3 trees, there was a faint sketch of a waterfall. But there was no waterfall here. The rock face was dry. I looked closer at the rock behind the middle tree. It was darker than the surrounding granite, streaked with moss and lichen in vertical lines, as if water had once flowed over it for a very long time. It was the ghost of a waterfall. I stood up and walked to the dark patch of rock. It was covered in a thick curtain of ivy and moss, clinging to the stone like a matted green beard. It looked solid, natural, but my grandfather's words echoed in my head. The door is not a door. It's a curtain. My heart pounding, I reached out and grabbed a handful of the thick woody vines. I pulled. At first, nothing happened. I braced my feet and pulled again with all my weight. There was a tearing, ripping sound as ancient roots gave way. A section of the ivy curtain peeled away from the rock, revealing not stone, but wood. Dark, weathered planks of wood, fitted so perfectly against the rock that they were nearly invisible. And in the center of the planks was a simple iron ring handle. It wasn't a cabin sealed inside the mountain. It was a cabin built into the mountain, using a massive rock overhang as its roof and the cliff face as its back wall, camouflaged by nature itself. I had found it. With a final, desperate heave, I pulled the heavy wooden door open. It swung inward without a sound, perfectly balanced on hidden hinges. A cool, still air, smelling of cedar and beeswax, flowed out to meet me. I stepped across the threshold, out of the bright afternoon sun and into the heart of my grandfather's secret. The interior was stunning. It was nothing like the primitive shack below. The walls were lined with smooth, polished cedar planks that glowed with a warm, amber light from a large skylight cut into the rock overhang above. A massive, beautifully built stone fireplace, a larger twin to the one in the decoy cabin, dominated the far wall. A comfortable-looking armchair and a sofa were arranged in front of it. Bookshelves crammed with books on engineering, history, geology, and classic literature lined one entire wall. There was a large drafting table in one corner, covered with blueprints and schematics. In another corner was a small but complete workshop, with tools hung neatly on a pegboard. This wasn't just a hideout, it was a home, a place of warmth and intellect and safety. This was the man I remembered. I ran my hand along the back of the armchair. The leather was soft and worn. I could picture him sitting here, reading by the fire, looking out at the valley through a cleverly concealed observation window next to the fireplace. A wave of grief, so sharp and sudden it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. I had missed so much. We had both missed so much. On a large oak desk in the center of the room, there was another envelope, identical to the first, and beside it, a stack of what looked like legal documents, held together with a thick rubber band. I sat down in the heavy oak chair behind the desk. It felt like sitting in a throne. I opened the envelope. The letter inside was much longer than the first. Welcome home. I am so sorry you had to find it this way. I always dreamed I would be the one to show you this place, to explain everything face to face. I built it for us. After your parents were gone, I knew I needed a place where we could be safe, a place the world couldn't touch. I spent years building it piece by piece, hauling every plank of wood and bag of cement up here on my own back. It was my ark, my fortress. Now, for the rest of the story. The man I told you about, the one who came looking for me, his name is Marcus Thorne. He was the leader of the crew that ran the illegal mine. But he wasn't just a small-time crook. He's the founder and CEO of West Ridge Holdings. He spent the last 20 years trying to become a legitimate businessman, but he built his empire on stolen money and intimidation. The reason he wants this land so badly isn't for a ski resort or luxury condos, like he tells the county. It's because the old mine shaft is on this property, and in that mine is the evidence of his first and greatest crime. Back then, Thorne had a partner, a geologist named Robert Farrow. Farrow was the brains of the operation, but he had a conscience. When he realized how dangerous and unstable the mine was, and how ruthless Thorne was becoming, he wanted out. He confronted Thorne. There was a fight. Thorne, in a rage, caused a cave-in, intentionally trapping Farrow inside the mine to silence him forever. He told the rest of the crew it was a tragic accident. I was hunting nearby and saw the whole thing. I saw Thorne run from the mine, and I saw the plume of dust. I knew it wasn't an accident. I went to the sheriff, but Thorne had already paid him off. The official story was that Farrow, despondent over the mine's failure, had sealed himself inside. They never even tried to recover the body. I knew I was a loose end. I started building this place immediately. I also started collecting proof. Thorne got sloppy. He thought he was untouchable. Over the years, I gathered everything I could. The stack of documents on this desk is my life's work. It's all there, Leo. The original mining claim, which proves Farrow was a partner, not an employee. Financial records I managed to get from a disgruntled former associate, showing the money trail from the mine to the seed fund for West Ridge. And most importantly, a sworn, notarized affidavit from another member of the crew who was there that day. He was a good kid who got in over his head. He was terrified of Thorne, but his conscience ate at him for years. I found him a few years ago, dying of cancer. He told me everything and signed the statement just before he passed. It details the murder of Robert Farrow in his own words. This is your inheritance, Leo. It's not 40 acres of dirt. It's a chance for justice. Thorne doesn't know this evidence exists. He just knows I was a witness, and he wants this land to make sure that mine shaft stays buried forever. You have a choice. You can take this evidence to the authorities. It's enough to reopen the case, to expose Thorne for the murderer and thief he is. It will be dangerous. Thorne is a powerful man. He will fight you. Or you could destroy it all. You can walk away. No one would blame you. You could even use this information to blackmail him. He would pay a fortune for your silence. I don't know what you will do. I only know that I raise you to be a man with a strong heart. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. The money to pay the back taxes and more is in the floor safe behind the fireplace. The combination is your birthday. I saved it for you a little at a time over the years. This place is yours now, free and clear if you want it. Protect it. The old man will protect you. All my love, Grandpa. I sat in the silent cabin, the weight of his words pressing down on me. He hadn't just left me a choice. He had left me a moral test. He had handed me a weapon and trusted me to use it wisely. Blackmail. The thought was tempting. I could be rich. I could have a life of ease, a life I'd never even dreamed of. But it would be a life built on a foundation of silence, on the same kind of rotten secrets that had haunted my grandfather. It would mean letting Marcus Thorne win. It would mean Robert Farrow's death meant nothing. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the observation window. I saw a scared kid, a kid who had been running his whole life. But I saw something else in my eyes, too. A flicker of my grandfather's stubborn defiance. I knew what I had to do. There was a satellite phone on the desk, an old, clunky model, but the power light was green. I picked it up and dialed the number on Ms. Alvarez's business card. She answered on the second ring. Alvarez, Ms. Alvarez, I said, my voice steady. It's Leo Vance. There was a pause on the other end. Mr. Vance, have you come to your senses? Are you ready to sign the papers? No, I said, looking at the stack of documents on the desk. I'm not signing anything. We're going to file a counteroffer. And I think you're going to need to contact the district attorney's office. I have evidence pertaining to a murder. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. Ms. Alvarez, who had at first been skeptical, became a fierce advocate once she saw the evidence. She flew in a team of investigators and forensic experts. They excavated the mine shaft, and they found what was left of Robert Farrow. The affidavit, combined with the financial records and the discovery of the body, was enough. The story exploded. Marcus Thorne, the celebrated CEO and philanthropist, was exposed as a killer. His corporate empire crumbled, and he was arrested. West Ridge Holdings withdrew its offer and collapsed into bankruptcy. I had to give statements, sit for depositions, and face a barrage of media attention, which I avoided by staying hidden in the mountain cabin. Through it all, I felt my grandfather's presence, a quiet strength guiding me. The $9,000 in back taxes were paid from the money in the safe. The rest, a substantial sum, was put into a trust. The land was officially, legally mine. The lien was lifted. The threat was gone. One crisp autumn afternoon, a few months after it all ended, I was sitting on the ledge outside the hidden cabin, watching the sun set over the valley. The air was cold and clean. I had spent the past weeks working on the property. I'd repaired the roof on the old shack, turning it into a guest cabin and workshop. I'd cleared the path and planted a small garden. I was learning the rhythms of the mountain, the way the light changed on the granite face of the old man, the sound of the wind in the pines. It was hard work, physical and demanding, and I had never felt more at peace. I wasn't a case number anymore. I was Leo Vance, the guardian of this mountain. This was my home. I had inherited more than just land. I had inherited a purpose. I had a history that was no longer a source of shame, but a source of strength. My grandfather had given me the greatest gift of all, not a property, but a second chance. A chance to build a life on a foundation of truth and courage. He had taught me that home isn't just a place you live. It's a place you fight for. It's a story you choose to be a part of. My story had started with an ending, the end of my time in the system, the end of my childhood. But here, on this mountain, a new story was beginning. A story of resilience, of justice, and of finding your place in a world that seems determined to tell you that you don't have one. And as the last light of the sun faded behind the peaks, I knew, with a certainty that filled every part of me, that I was no longer alone. My grandfather was here in the whisper of the wind, in the strength of the ancient trees, in the solid rock beneath my feet. And I was finally home. This journey taught me that the stories we tell ourselves about our past are powerful. For a decade, I told myself a story of abandonment, and it defined me. But the truth was a story of protection, of sacrifice. It changed everything. So I want to ask you, what stories are you telling yourself? And what would happen if you found out they weren't true? If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own journey, please consider subscribing to the channel. This is more than just a place for stories. It's a community for people who understand that the hardest paths often lead to the most beautiful views. Share your own story in the comments if you feel comfortable. Let us know about a time you chose the harder right over the easier wrong. Thank you for listening. And remember, no matter where you're on your path, you have the power to start a new chapter